Welcome to Crude Awakenings, a podcast created to bring the industry back to the truth and to the conversations in oil and gas that nobody else likes to talk about. Hosted by Alan Gilmer, one of the founders of Drilling Info, now in Barris, and Cody Davis, CEO of the Oil and Gas Asset Clearinghouse. What if you woke up one morning and found out every new well you drill now requires a federal permit that takes a year to get and costs tens of thousands of dollars? Or what if you got a call saying a load of skim oil you sold decades ago suddenly made you liable for a Superfund cleanup site? In this episode, Alan and Cody sit down with Tad Mayfield to discuss two of the most important regulatory battles independent producers have faced in recent decades. From fighting the EPA over stormwater permitting rules to pushing back against decades-old Superfund liability claims, Tad shares how one independent producer helped protect the future of the entire industry. This is a conversation about regulatory overreach, independent producers, and why Congress, not unelected bureaucracies, should be the only ones capable of reshaping the American economy. This episode is brought to you by the Oil and Gas Asset Clearinghouse. It's time for Crude Awakenings.
This is going to be a good one today, and I really appreciate my friend Tad Mayfield for coming on here today, because I think what we're going to talk about today a lot is regulatory overreach. And I think that a normal person listening to the news doesn't understand. When they hear regulation, they think, well, that's great. It's keeping poisonous water from kids and things like that. But those of us who are in the oil business understand another underbelly to it. And one of the reasons why the concept of getting rid of regulation sometimes is really helpful, because the concept of regulatory overreach and the concept that that regulations sometimes are used to punish as opposed to protect. The other thing that this really touches upon is the fact that these are two cases in which the most important industry in Texas, and definitely one of the most important industries in the United States, really had an existential threat thrown against it. And it was noticed and it was fought by an independent oil and gas company, and a company that really defines mom and pop. It's been around, it's a multi-generation family-owned oil company. And it was not taken up by the major oil companies or big oil. And it was fought by small oil, and it's fought by an organization or a couple of organizations that represented small oil. When we think about big oil, should have known about it, should have fought it, should have been right in the front of it, and they did not do that. And I think that that's why I'm really excited about introducing today Tad Mayfield, who's basically a hero of mine, because I don't know if a lot of us would even be sitting today in the oil business had he not really picked up the ball off the field and ran with it in an important way. So Tad, thanks for coming and joining on our podcast today.
Yeah, Alan, it's great to be here. And I appreciate all of what you said, but it's been teamwork on all of this. And, we need minimal but only necessary government regulations. The government should not be picking winners and losers. And when government agencies get too involved into aspects of our life, in the free markets, we lose the free markets. We're not able to function, and the harm is really on the backs of the consumers, with higher prices, higher inflation, higher interest rates, lower growth. And we need to have rules and regulations conducive for exploration and production. You mentioned how important oil and gas is, or oil is to our industry, to our economy, to our world. It really is. It's fundamental with most everything we do, and we use it in all aspects of our lives. It's been a blessing to our society, to humankind. People used to live till their 30s or so. That was the life expectancy. But then after oil and gas, now we're living nice, ripe old ages. And we need to be very, very supportive of this industry. People need to understand. And we need to be strong supporters for the moral case for fossil fuels.
Thank you for that, Tad. And I want to introduce Cody. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, the co-host of Crude Awakening?
Yeah, Tad, nice to meet you. I feel like through the years being partnered with Alan and known Alan for a long time, I've heard about you, several times. He's mentioned what you've done and what you've been doing. So it's good to finally meet you. But yeah, my experience is similar to yours in the fact that I've been an operator most of the last 20 years. And then have also spent a good amount of time on the A&D side at the clearinghouse as a partner with Alan at the oil and gas asset clearinghouse. So all the people that I know that I run with and that we're clients at clearinghouse, they're all going to be extremely appreciative to hear your story. And really, I'm glad we're getting to learn about everything you've done for the industry.
Well, I appreciate that.
So when I first met Tad, I was on the board of the Texas Independent Producers and Royalty Owners Association, which I joined for a lot of people, similar to a lot of people, is to have contacts in the oil business and people that I could, thinking that I was going to socially benefit my business by knowing people in the oil and gas business. And little did I know when I got involved in that and got involved in some of the committee work at TIPRO that what it really does is much more than a bunch of guys getting together and drinking whiskey. In fact, it's very little of that, unfortunately. But but what it really is going out there and fighting these fights. Every legislative session, something comes up that, in some cases, it's a piece of legislation or a dozen pieces of legislation that are innocently proposed by someone, but that have huge unintended consequences. And it's really, and then TIPRO is typically the one that goes out there and figures out what those unintended consequences are and makes sure that everybody understands it. So, and it's comprised of independent oil and gas companies. It's the largest state organization of its kind in Texas for independents. And so when I first heard about it, Tad had come to talk to TIPRO about this one issue that involved the EPA. So there's two different issues we want to talk about today. The first is essentially the stormwater. It's a stormwater regulations that the EPA was introducing, or had introduced, actually it was in law, in which oil and gas activity or oil and gas operations were specifically exempted. I think that was the wording in the legislation, and it had to do with construction sites. The original law was about, or regulation was about, what do you do about construction sites that are over 5 acres, and how you deal with those, and it required a whole federal permitting process for getting the EPA involved in everything that was going to be built in the country that was over 5 acres in space. And then over a period of years, that was to change into things that were 1 acre. Now, once it becomes 1 acre, then it starts impacting drilling pads. But everyone thinking that it was going to be an exemption because oil and gas activity was specifically exempted, there became a very interesting case in which the EPA decided to redefine what oil and gas drilling activity meant or operations meant. And for them, it meant saying that it began when the well started, when the bit started to turn, as opposed to when you started preparing your pad. And so could the industry have dealt with the technical needs of stormwater aspects on their pads? Yes, they were pretty simple. The issues that came about with regards to regulatory or permitting, federal permitting, and the costs involved, and then all of a sudden just kind of the gray area of what they would agree to and not agree to, or permit or not a permit, became something that was really important. And Tad was the first to really recognize this and had filed suit on behalf of his organization against the EPA. And then, and personally, along with his geologist, I think his landman, engineer, geologist, everyone kicked in a substantial amount of money to go out and fight this. And it wasn't coming from any big company or anything like that. It was coming from Goldston Oil and Gas. So I just want to use that as a predicate. And tell us a little bit about how this came about.
Yeah, Alan, I think you gave a good overview of this, but this one, stormwater discharge, was an issue with the EPA. The other one that we'll be talking about is with the state organization, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. What these both have in common is that if we would have lost these cases, the industry would be in the ditch. We would have trouble producing oil and gas. The Texas would not have its production like it does now, nor the U.S., and that would really have harmed us on the world stage. And oil prices would be a lot higher, harming the economy. But regarding stormwater discharge, this was back in 2002. And I will also, give my hats off to TIPRO, the Texas Independent Producers and Royalty Owners Association, of which Alan, by the way, chaired for several years, and I did too as well. And it's a fantastic organization standing up for the rights and for E&P operators and helping to provide a conducive environment so that we can just do our business. But back in 2002, this was one of those issues that was under the radar screen. The majors were handling it. The EPA in the Clean Water Act with the stormwater exclusion or exemption for oil and gas activities were taking this. They were making the case that building an oil and gas location is not an oil and gas activity. Think about that. I mean, it just sounds absurd. So here you have a government agency that is really twisting the law. I mean, until it just talks back to you. But when I analyzed this and I looked at our different risks for being in business, and we're just, we've been around for a long time, actually, for about 100 years. But we're a smaller independent producer. We don't have refineries. We explore for wells and produce wells. And there's a lot of risks with our industry. But looking at the risk from this potential change to the regulation could have just really harmed us and our industry. And it would have required compliance with the stormwater discharge regulations, where we have to comply with making sure we don't have contaminated runoff. That's still part of the regulation, no matter if we're conditionally exempt or not. But we would have had to get permits and file certifications of compliance with the Historical Preservation Act, the Endangered Species Act. There were $27,500 a day penalties that were even criminal for non-compliance. And what people don't understand is the difficulty with putting together leases in order to have enough acreage to drill a well. And it can take over 3 years sometimes to put together a prospect. And by the time you have it put together, and your leases typically are maybe 3-year leases with maybe a 2-year extension if you're lucky, and to go then to try to get federal permitting would not be possible. I mean, deals would be destroyed. And we looked upon that as being one of our greatest risks. So we got involved, and TIPRO, thank goodness, was willing to help and put their name on this lawsuit. And so we filed against the EPA and took the issue away from the majors. And it was quite an ordeal. We had a lot of folks who came on board to help. I had a wonderful co-partner on this, Malcolm Johns with Dominion, who was co-chairing this case against the EPA. And it was an amazing undertaking. It was I felt like a lost pilot. I knew we were making good time, but I didn't know where we are on this thing or where we were headed. But anyway, it was expensive. It was time consuming, but in the end, well worth the cause.
And there was the EPA threw all sorts of delays into the court, the aspect of the court hearings. And in fact, I think it was through this process was the first time I ever heard of the concept of what was it, round trip court cases from the environmental groups that were pushing the EPA to do stuff that the EPA really wanted to do.
Sue and settle.
And
Exactly.
so what would happen is the EPA wanted to go, if they thought it was a good idea to go gather more power to go do something for more regulatory effort, they could get one of these groups to sit there and sue the EPA. The EPA would settle by agreeing to go do that and then pay these groups money to for their legal fees. They could make money at it.
And that is a way to effectively create legislation without going through the legislatures.
Yeah, that was. This suit to me, and being as involved tangentially as I was so eye-opening with regards to just the behaviors and how wrong it was, how un-American it seemed to me to go to utilize regulations in this way.
Well, we filed suit in both the Fifth Circuit and the Seventh Circuit. So different components of the cases went to different courts, and we, also tried to talk with the EPA. They, I was a little bit concerned about possible retribution, but actually I was really happy to see that there was none of that. And they actually invited me to come speak at a couple of their events, which I did. They expressed their appreciation for my slideshows that I showed, but they still would not come off, with their position that that building an oil and gas location was not an oil and gas activity.
What were they calling it, Tad? What were they saying? I mean, if it wasn't
a construction activity, which of course it is, but it's an oil and gas construction activity, and it just goes against the very, the meaning behind the law and the purpose of the law. It just flies in its face, and I knew we were going to end up winning this. The Fifth Circuit, we kept getting 1 year postponements of the implementation of these rules, and which really helped. The Fifth Circuit, I think one of the judges thought they might be nominated to the Supreme Court, and they didn't want to rule on an environmental matter. But they actually ruled that we were not ripe in the Fifth Circuit because of these 1 year extensions of the rule. And the Seventh Circuit, I believe, got upset at the Fifth Circuit. They took more or less the entire case and ended up ruling in our favor. And another interesting aspect of this is we actually changed federal law. I don't know do y'all remember Joe Barton when he used to chair the Energy Commerce Committee in the House? And great guy, truly a supporter of oil and gas in our industry. But he actually it was one of the last energy bills that passed, but he actually slipped into the energy bill a simple statement saying building an oil and gas location is an oil and gas activity. I mean, it's really a controversial statement, is it not?
Well, I think, what really stood out to me was that it was not the majors that did this, that it was not the bigger organizations that took up the mantle, that it was Tad Mayfield and it was TIPRO and it was groups like that. Who were the ones that surprised you in their absence and And who surprised you maybe in their presence?
Absence as far as?
Just absence in terms of advocating or picking up and helping with this.
Okay, so this was an issue handled by the majors. And I'm going to give an analogy. Big tech, loves regulations because they're already big, and the regulations prevent the little guys and mom and pops from becoming big guys. It's a barrier to entry. And the majors, I believe, were looking upon this as they had these staffs, they could handle these regulations. It would be another barrier to entry for the smaller E&P operators, of which, there's probably 9,000 or so operators in the United States with an average number of employees of around 12 or so. There's a lot of us, and there's a lot of supporting industries, and the majors depend on the smaller E&P operators for technology, for finding drilling wells. It's amazing how important they are to the industry and to the U.S. But the majors were okay with this. And so I would say from that standpoint, from your question, Alan, the absent ones were by and large the majors on this.
It was a funny story. When I first became the chairman of TIPRO, I was in D.C. and I ran into a guy who's known to a friend of ours and who is a government affairs guy with a large privately held independent that I think you're familiar with. And at dinner that night, we were just having dinner. He said, Alan, there's something you need to know if you're going to be the chairman of TIPRO. He said, government affairs guys are not your friends. He said, they are not the independents' friends. And I said, I don't care who they work for. And he said, they, especially the big companies. He said, the big companies are looking at how to kneecap independence. And the government affairs guys themselves are part of the government affairs tribe and not the oil and gas tribe. And that when those tribes somehow become entangled with one another or become at odds, you know which way their loyalties are going to be, and it's not going to be on the oil and gas side. And that was an enlightening conversation, and it was an interesting conversation. And so whenever we would have a conversation, I use that. I've always used that as good to know, store it away so that when I can understand what people are talking about. What are their true motivations? And to the point that you're talking about, I can tell you that another government affairs person that we know from a major oil company was unapologetic about using certain rules and regulations that were going to really kneecap the industry because it was going to kneecap independence, and that they were big enough to be able to handle any of these regulations that were coming across the board because they knew that it wasn't going to hurt them.
Yeah, I agree. It's a different mentality between the majors and independents. And you think about the importance. The majors are certainly important. Obviously, we go fill up with gas at their stations. They have these wonderful refineries that make life livable. The plastic, from all the plastics we use. And so I'm a huge supporter of the industry and the majors and, the powerhouse in manufacturing that they create. I want them to be supporters, though, of the independent. Really think about it. If they really think about it, they should be so grateful to the independents as we are when we fill up with gas. Think about guys like George Mitchell, who basically was the father of fracking. And, without the fracking, we would not have $60 oil right now, we would have $300 oil. Inflation and interest rates would be huge. If the Trump administration is listening right now, and I hope they do, they should give his family a posthumous medal. Give him a medal for what he did for the industry, for the U.S., and for the world. He should receive the Congressional Gold Medal.
Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Yes, exactly. I mean, if you think about someone who's made more difference to the world in so many different ways, I would say that oil and gas is the most important industry in the world, because without it, you're not going to have any of the other industries. And we would go hungry. We wouldn't have medicines. We would not have clothing. We wouldn't have shelter. You look around my background in this room right here, and what I'm wearing, this all has petroleum components to it. And if you make all that stuff expensive, it's going to really, really harm people. The energy poverty in this world is just enormous. And what people don't realize here in the U.S. is how good we have it. There's a reason people are flocking here around the world. We have such an abundance. We have that because of free markets. And because of the resources that the U.S. has. We need to be supportive of that. But the independents, think of them as the garage inventor. Think of them as inventing all this incredible stuff like a garage inventor does. In our U.S. Constitution, it talks about patents. The founding fathers were brilliant in encouraging garage inventors. Well, that's what the independents are. And they drill most of the wells, they have most of the production, and then the majors, when the independents get big enough, the majors buy them out. That's part of their model. So we're like a healthy lake or stream. You want big fish, and you want small fish, and you want medium-sized fish. And the independents provide the healthy stream and healthy lake environment.
That's very well put. And I think that the concept. Big oil is our friend. They've done a great. I mean, they need to be more supportive of the independent across the board, because we are that which allows there to be a frictionless surface.
I will say that I think on most of the issues, the majors and the independents are aligned. On most issues, there are a few that are not so much alignment, but we all should work together and work as a team because of the importance to the America and to the American people to make sure we have abundance of petroleum liquids. And that just helps us, all of us, in so many different ways. Over 80% of our energy is oil, gas, and I'll say coal as well. And after several $1 trillion spent on, I'd say, unreliable resources, we're still over 80% oil and gas and coal. And I'm supportive of anyone who can make energy. I just don't want the government to be picking winners and losers. Let the free market work. And I'll say that if something's expensive and it has to have subsidies, it's probably not environmental. And if you look at their overall cost equation and the carbon equation, there's a lot of carbon that goes into non-economic type of ventures that require government support. And all that does is increase our cost, increase our budget deficit, and it doesn't help the environment. We need to let the free market work. And typically the free market with minimal, like we said, and necessary regulations are what's best for the environment and the best way to keep prices low.
Well, let's take a look at the second issue that you picked up the ball and ran with, not willingly, but because you guys were caught by a group for something that I'd say that any oil and gas guy around would not likely even have records on.
Yeah, and Alan's told me this story. I've heard it twice, and every time I heard a little bit of it a while ago, and I heard more of it today. This is mind blowing to me. I didn't know as an operator this was even possible. So I know a lot of people that hear this are going to be, I think they're going to be as blown away as I was. This is even a possibility. So,
this one is a humdinger, and I'll a message to all independent producers: keep your records, keep old well files. Do not throw them away. You never know when they may come back to help you. And in this one in particular, that happened. But this is a story about a Texas agency that came out of its lanes, and it really should be a lesson taught in oil and gas law. I think this would be a great, part of an oil and gas law course to learn what happened here. And there's law involved. There are government agencies that are at odds with each other, and there's a little bitty old independent fighting to stay out from being a responsible party for a state Superfund cleanup site that we had nothing to do with. And yet when you are a responsible party, it's joined several. So if you're the last one standing and you have just a little bitty part in a Superfund site, you can be responsible for the whole thing. And that's bankrupt city. So we had to fight, guys. And this story started back in 1986. And all we did, Goldston Oil Corporation, we did something that's routine. Every oil company does this. We did no wrong. All we did is sell a tank load of skim oil at a market price. We have sold 165 barrels of skim oil, which had 2 barrels of calculated basic sediment water. So that's normal. That's spec crude. All oil has just a little component of water and a little component of basic sediment that comes out of the formation.
And typically when people come to buy that, they run a sample of the oil through a centrifuge, so they discount how much they're paying you, right?
Yes,
it's just
exactly.
a standard operating procedure.
And they're incented, the buyer's incented to put as much on as possible so he can pay you as little as possible, right? And so just so if anybody's curious what skim oil is, oil comes out of the ground most all the time, not all, but most all the time with water. It's just naturally occurring water in the formation. It's generally salt water almost all the time. It was deposited there years ago. It's old ocean water that's been heated up, and you've had sedimentation put on top, and it goes way down under the ground over a period of time due to the buildup of sedimentation. That's another story. But when you produce oil and water, it comes through a separator, generally on your location, and it's gravity separated. The oil and natural gas are all gravity separated, and the oil goes to the oil tanks, and the water goes to a water tank, and then many times with bigger operations to a central tank battery. And when the water goes to the central tank battery, it'll either be hauled off for disposal in a saltwater disposal well, or it will be injected into a disposal well on location like we had. And when you have water going to a water tank at a tank battery, it does carry a little bit of crude with it that wasn't separated. It may have been entrained crude in the water. And so over a period of time, the amount of crude building up in your tank will become large enough where you can sell it. It's just a second separation of the crude and a second sale of crude that hadn't been sold. And so that's called skim oil because it's skimmed off the surface of the water. And it's spec grade crude. And anyway, we sold 165 barrels, and we actually had the copies of the cashier's check where we got paid because you don't sell skim oil all the time. So they're one-off sales, and we had a cashier's check. We had that in a file, and we sold it at a market price. And back, so that was in 1986, 30, how long ago was that? 40 years ago. And so in 1993, we get a letter from the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission, TNRCC, which is the agency that eventually became the TCEQ, that we were a potential responsible party. We hired an attorney with Fulbright, Pat Braddock, wonderful attorney, and she used to work at the TNRCC, very well respected. And she studied this issue, that we are part of the petroleum exclusion. This is very important, y'all. The petroleum exclusion is what keeps our industry alive. It's an EPA law a U.S. law, and also has been adopted by the TCEQ. But there's an exclusion for petroleum products from being hazardous material if they're produced at the well site, or petroleum products or the components thereof. So it includes oil, skim oil, tank bottoms. If it comes off your well site, it's been naturally produced, it's excluded until the time it arrives at a refinery and then is placed in a tank battery at a refinery. From there on, it's not subject to the petroleum exclusion. The law is very clear on this. There's not ambiguity on this issue. And after Pat Braddock talked with the TNRCC, they said, we understand, we agree, you will never hear from us again, but we can't send you a letter. And we go, okay. So, I'll just sort of went, well, that's that. Good deal. Thank you, Pat. And we were all very happy. So in 2021, this is 37 years after 1986, I'm on a vacation. I'm like with my family in an RV, about to go fishing on the San Juan on a trip going up to Montana. We're having a great time. This is like in early July. I get this phone call from our attorney, John Vay, wonderful guy, man. Hey, Tad, Goldston was just made a responsible party to the Bay Superfund cleanup site. And by the way, there's a hearing in 3 weeks where they're probably going to make a decision on if you're a responsible party. And I'm going, huh? What? Wait. Let me get my waders off,
And being named a responsible party for a Superfund site is tantamount to the same thing as like getting a phone call saying, you've just there's a warrant out for being a child predator or something like that. It wrecks your life.
I don't think it can get much worse outside of jail. And it's like we talked about, it's joined several. This happened so long ago. So many of these companies were bankrupt. Very few, they just wanted more money. And I said, Goldston was on the list before. We'll just put them on again. And so we were listed as a potentially responsible party and had 3 weeks. And you can imagine what that did to my vacation. It just like threw it on its head. And so I was scrambling. And, so I hired. That's when I hired, John actually, John hired John Vay to help me out, and he helped work on this, but he was actually retiring, and so I ended up hiring Rod Johnson with Enoch Kiver, and great guy, and he's retired now, but he helped us out tremendously. But here was the due process, guys. The due process was this. There is no due process at the TCEQ. This is a problem. We need to fix it. And the TCEQ needs our help, Alan. TIPRO, I'm hopeful, can be helpful on this. And that's how I look on this. They're a good agency in many respects. Their mission's good. They're supposed to help keep clean water and keep the environment clean water and air. And in Texas, that's a good mission. But they need to stay in their lanes and do things right. And so this was not right, and they did not stay in their lanes. And we had 3 minutes to speak, and it was amazing at the hearing. And I mean, the best I can say is that, that there were egregious misstatements made at the hearing by the staff attorney at the TCEQ. And, basically, the chairman of the TCEQ was trying to find out what the facts were. And, he actually asked if crude, he said crude oil is excluded from the definition of hazardous waste. But he said it doesn't apply to tank bottoms, of which this wasn't tank bottoms, but sludge or other contaminants that are on the crude. Is that correct? And their attorney said, yes, that's correct. Well, that's not correct. Well, first of all, we didn't have tank bottoms. Even if we did, it would still be covered by the petroleum exclusion. So if the petroleum exclusion covers oil and gas production sites for naturally produced crude and tank bottoms, and it includes petroleum, including crude oil and other fractions thereof, and that's tank bottoms. And so that was, first of all, an incorrect statement. There were other questions asked, like, what evidence are you going to point to on this? And he said, the staff attorney said, we have evidence pointing to shipments from Golston to the site, as well as shipments arranged for by Mission Petroleum. And that he said, regardless, now this is what the staff attorney said, regardless of whether there was a sale disguised as a disposal, our evidence shows that Golston in particular has liability under the arranger theory of Superfund liability. So the arranger theory would be, well, we arranged for our quote unquote tank bottoms to go to the McBay site. And I go, God, they must have something I don't know about. What is it? And I was dying to know. The chairman asked, "Can you go deeper, or in the terms of type of contaminants or specific documentary evidence that you should point to?" And the staff attorney said, "Yes, specifically with regards to BS&W that we talked about, and other contaminants of concern found at the site, but I also know there's litigation potential on the site, so that's guiding my response as well." So they did not even want to answer the chairman's question for fear of the litigation. And so the chairman had incomplete information. He had incorrect information. And we were one of 147 parties they were looking at to include as responsible parties. And, basically, the chairman said, well, I just want to make sure that we have on record a record that supports our action. And that was basically it. And they voted to include. I thought we were going to be out of this, after
it was
3 minutes.
Would it be all right if we post that hearing, the transcript of that hearing?
Oh, it's public record. So
great. So we can do that. We'll make that available through this thing, because it's very telling. Because essentially they were accusing Golston of trying to hide, getting rid of hazardous waste as a crude oil, as a sale. And yet every bit of evidence was you sold it as just skim oil. It was calculated, the amount that was decided, the barrel and a half was underneath the 2% exclusion, and the fact that it was calculated from a test. So it was like every bit of evidence was that they had nothing to go on.
Exactly. And Alan, think about the ramifications. If we didn't have the petroleum exclusion, all of our industry would have to keep track of our downstream barrels after we sell it, which is an impossible task. It would destroy the industry. You can't get insurance for that. And so we would go, it would be too risky to be in the business. It's like Borden, being responsible for someone dropping a jug of milk in the grocery store, clean up on all nine. And Board and Milk shouldn't be responsible for that. And here there was no jug of milk dropped. I mean, it's like someone selling a car and being responsible for all the successor drivers and driving recklessly with the car. I mean, no one would own a car if you were responsible for downstream. So it's ridiculous. But, just very quickly after our 3 minutes of, that's all we got, 3 minutes.
Three minutes, and it was existential to your company.
And to our industry. And they ruled 147 parties. Most of them were already out of business or bankrupt from 1986. As you know, companies generally don't last that long in the oil and gas industry. Some do, but many don't.
So the due process part of that is that, I mean, they didn't let you answer. So basically they would go through, and you had your 3 minutes, but then they would go through all the false information out there, and you had no way to counter that or question.
You can't counter that in 3 minutes.
No objection. Yeah.
And you can't cross-examine. The Railroad Commission is the example of due process. They have, when you have a contested case, they have hearings, and you can hire an attorney, you can cross-examine, you can ask questions, you can demand information, and go through all that before a ruling is made by the Railroad Commission. And I want to say, this was so interesting about the case. We'll get to this, why this ought to be a law school case. But the three commissioners at the Railroad Commission are elected by the people. They are not answerable to the government, to the governor. The TCEQ has three commissioners who are appointed by the governor, who in turn is answerable to the people. So you got one agency, the Railroad Commission, who's answerable to the people, and you've got the governor who's answerable to the people. And there's not only a petroleum exclusion, there's a memorandum of understanding between the Railroad Commission and the TCEQ, and that acknowledges the petroleum exclusion, and those things that are excluded are Railroad Commission jurisdiction. So if we had lost, not only would this be untenable for the oil and gas industry and uninsurable, but the Railroad Commission would have lost a large part of their jurisdiction, because this is way within, it's right in the center of the target within their lanes. And so the only due process we had under the law was to file a lawsuit, which had to be filed within 30 days. So 3 weeks and 30 days after I was on my vacation, we had to file a major lawsuit, which, is very difficult to put together a case in just 30 days to adequately describe, how you've been harmed. But we did. We put it together. And I actually called another company that was involved with one of the 147 parties on the last day of the 30 days and said, "Hey, are y'all filing a lawsuit?" And they go, "Oh, no." Well, they ended up filing a lawsuit that afternoon or that evening just to get in under the wire. I was surprised. But that's the due process. And what a waste for the TCEQ, waste for us. But I will tell you, I think we were maybe the only ones who have ever gotten out of being, I could be wrong on this, but labeled a responsible party and filed a suit and actually gotten out. And I'll tell you how that happened. And a good friend of mine gave me some sage advice on this. I won't say who it is, but a really good oil and gas attorney. He said, "Tad, look, this is Railroad Commission jurisdiction. They don't want to lose this jurisdiction. You need to get them involved and make this between the Railroad Commission and the TCEQ. That's where it belongs." And the sad part about this, y'all, is that there's very little communication between the two agencies. And, I hope, the governor's office hears this, because he can ask the commissioners to communicate better with the Railroad Commission on issues like this and on where their jurisdiction is and the Railroad Commission's jurisdiction is, and to make sure everybody stays in their lane. But, there's very little pushback on the TCEQ when they find responsible parties. Companies just give up. They settle. It's so much cheaper than going to a lawsuit, except you remain a responsible party. and you never know when that will get you or when they start passing the hat around again, trying to raise money. So we filed a suit, and then we went after it, and it was we actually informed the Railroad Commission on this, and I want to give them thanks. We've got 3 great railroad commissioners. Chairman Jim Wright did a wonderful job helping us. So did Christy Craddock and Wayne Christian. All 3 of them wrote letters on our behalf that we put in our summary judgment. Also, I've never heard or seen, maybe y'all have, but I have not, a politician actually sign an affidavit on behalf of a private company. And we did not ask for that. It was something that Chairman Jim Wright did. He's familiar with the waste business, and he wrote the most awesome affidavit on our behalf. So we had all 3 railroad commissioners saying, this is subject to the petroleum exclusion and its railroad commission jurisdiction. And that was Exhibit A in our motion for summary judgment. And you can imagine this was the court in Austin, which can be liberal. But we had, I thought, a good judge, and I was told she was a good judge. But you can imagine a judge's position on this, trying to rule against the TCEQ in favor of an independent. And that's why not many of these are challenged. But in this case, we positioned it, and the Railroad Commission had to. Otherwise, they would have lost a lot of their jurisdictional powers. The Railroad Commission stood up for their lanes and for what was right and for the petroleum exclusion. And this could have very easily, if the TCQ had not capitulated, evolved where the Railroad Commission would have had to be in the case against the TCEQ. Imagine how awful that would be for our state. And, it would not be good for the governor. It would not be good for the railroad commissioners. It would not be good for anyone to get into a spat like that. They ought to be working with each other. And, we even went to the governor's office, the TIPRO did, to try to get help on this, but unfortunately, they were not responsive on this. So this is where it was headed. And so 4 years later, we filed, listen to this. We filed for interrogatories and production, of information. Okay, so why we were curious, why are we involved? What do you have, that supports the statements that were made during the hearing? And the TCEQ's response was, we don't have to give you that information. We're a state agency, and we just don't have to do that. We go, yes, you do. Of course you do. There's precedent for that. So the day before the hearing with the judge, they did not want to go before the judge. And so they made an agreement with us, which is called a Rule 11 agreement, basically stipulating what the evidence was. So get this, the evidence was the R2 report to the Railroad Commission, not to the TCQ, by the purchaser, and the cashier's check. That's all the evidence they had. That's all they said they had. And we were just confounded. It was amazing. But once that happened, that was magical, because the Railroad Commission said, that's all there is. There's no mystery here. No, that's clearly in our lane. That's clearly our jurisdiction. And so that was hugely helpful. And so, it caused, I think, a conundrum in that this took 4 years to settle. We had a hard time getting the TCEQ at many times to respond on this. I think they didn't know what to do. But anyway, they ended up, with 3 settlement offers. And the first one was for $25,000. but we remained a responsible party. That would have been so much cheaper as far as the amount of money we spent on this. The second offer was $3,000. And no, and remain a responsible party. No. And they were, I don't think they'd ever seen this before, turning down a $3,000 settlement. But this was principle. And we were doing this not just for us, but for the industry and for the Railroad Commission. We had to win this thing and make sure that we had either a court ruling or settlement that further solidified the petroleum exclusion in the Railroad Commission's jurisdiction. Finally, this is after 4 years, they offered the settlement that we were able to work on, that we were no longer a responsible party and there was nothing owed. And so we ended up making that deal. We could have gone after attorney's fees. We decided not to. And we decided this was the best thing to do for all parties. And so we settled this. And, hats off to TIPRO. Could not have done it without TIPRO. Hats off to the Railroad Commissioners. We could not have done this without them. If the Railroad Commission had not gotten involved, if TIPRO had not gotten involved, then a judge in the TCQ and a small independent like Golston would have been determining the jurisdiction of the Railroad Commission.
Well, and essentially the future of all producers, big and small.
Yeah. So what does that mean for that future? I mean, should all of us be thinking about, thankfully this day and age, we have some digital records a little easier to keep than the old well files, but everybody has warehouses full or some boxes full if they're not scanned in of data. And I would hope this would keep the TCEQ from pursuing these further, but I would guess that's probably not the last time they'll do this kind of thing. I mean, what is your advice to all the other producers out there that everybody's sold tank bottoms, skim oil. They've all done it. I mean, what do you think this means for us, and how should we look at this going forward?
Well, number one, keep your records. Number two, if you're falsely accused of something, if we were accused and we actually did something that was not appropriate, I would have said, okay, you're right. We'll settle. What else do we need to do? I mean, you need to clean up your sandbox if you made a mess, and that's just being a good steward. But if you're falsely accused of something, I would say fight, and you fight hard, and you get the industry, you get a group like TIPRO involved, and get them on your side, and you keep after it, and don't settle until what's right has happened, and go to the mat. Oil and gas is too important for our state and our country to do otherwise, and at least here in Texas we have a supporting environment for this. That's why this is so contrary to the support you feel elsewhere in the state, and also what's happening nationally right now. Whether or not you like Trump or not, he certainly is pro oil and gas, and our governor of Texas is pro oil and gas. But this was not pro oil and gas. And anyway, I'll leave it to others to figure out why this happened and why this was so prolonged. But staying in the fight and staying in the game, not capitulating. I think all too often companies will just want to capitulate because they want to move on. And so I don't think you can do that.
So if you take a look at the CapEx in Texas for oil and gas, it's, today the companies like yourself are a small minority. And then the majors are their own thing. But it's really private equity powered companies, at least historically over the last decade or 15 years or 20, that have been responsible for most of the CapEx thrown into this business. And yet those companies seem to be absent in their representation at in groups like TIPRO. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, they are welcome to join TIPRO, and we strongly encourage them because it is good for their pocketbook as well. I think what happens, this is just my opinion and my guess with private equity, they want quick exit strategies on investments. And so since it's a kind of a, it's many times it's a temporary type of investment, they don't want to get permanently involved with an oil and gas association. But they really should if oil and gas is a big component of their portfolios. I never have understood that.
It's a major risk. And what you've identified today on the two cases were nearly existential risks to any producer of oil and gas with regards to that. And to not be aware of those seems to be kind of breaching a fiduciary trust, nearly.
Well, I agree with you. They definitely should be involved. I know a lot of folks in that business. They're great folks. Their capital is sorely needed for the industry, especially for the independents, to have the capital. This is a highly intensive capital business, oil and gas business, and highly risky. And that the private equity is needed. But, I will stand on top of the highest hill and shout my loudest voice toward the equity market folks that, associations like TIPRO are instrumental to making a conducive environment for E&P so that their investments can provide a return that they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, as you guys both know, not just in Texas, but all in every whether it's EPA or which obviously is a national deal, or even in each market with its own oil and gas commission, or there's all types of these all kinds of these things that pop up. We talk about New Mexico a lot, talk about Colorado. There's a lot of this overreach that happens, and it's happening every day. So I think it's out there more than we think about. Most people don't know. We had the what do you call it? The Inflation Reduction Act that was put in place by the Biden administration that, really almost, it got within weeks or months or days, it almost completely suffocated the entire natural gas side, natural gas business. We were on pace to really reduce the production or U.S. production of natural gas by a significant amount by waste emissions charges. And had Trump not come in his first month of his term and filed an action to stop that, we would have been, our whole entire industry would have been upside down. And I don't think people realize all those things that are continually out there, all the regulation that gets put in place, and that we need more of what you've done and what TIPRO does. And I think it's great to hear what you've done, and really inspiring and motivating for me to help and figure out how we can all work together to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen.
What other organizations are you a member of, Tad, that you feel very strongly about that have been helpful with regards to fighting the good fight?
Well, I've chaired and currently still on the board of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association. And that is another wonderful association, just like IPAA is a wonderful association. The IPAA is for the independents, and that's the DC representative for TIPRO. The U.S. Oil and Gas Association is the DC representative for Texoga, Namoga, Laoga, and those different state associations. And they are a mix of, IPAA is strictly independents, I believe. And there may be some majors involved too, but USOGA is a mix of both the majors and the independents. And then API is mostly, as y'all know, mostly all majors. So there's other national associations, but those are the main three. USOGA is more behind the scenes, but they're very effective. And this issue we talked about, like with Trump helping reverse some of the presidential policies, very, very important, but it's not lasting, y'all. It's only goes from administration to administration. And when you create a seesaw environment, where the pendulum is just going from one side to the other, well, on extremes, which I don't consider us extreme right now, just getting back to the middle, it's harmful to folks who want to invest in this country and create jobs to have that much uncertainty. What we need is legislation. We need legislation to fix so many of these things. I'm a proponent of the RAINS Act, and I think that's one of the most important pieces of legislation we could have passed. And that basically says that if a government agency promulgates rules or regulations that cost over $100 million, it should be approved by Congress. Only Congress should be able to destroy our economy. It shouldn't be left up to bureaucracies. And that would fix so much of this overreach between different administrations and keep that pendulum at least, somewhat near the center. There's a lot of things that need to be done legislative wise. As y'all know, the cloture doesn't allow a lot of that to get passed, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But right now it's a bad thing because there's some legislation that does need to get passed.
Well, I sure appreciate you taking the time out today and to talk about all these things with us, Tad. And I like to always think of you, Tad Mayfield, as the honey badger of our industry.
I want to expound kindness. We need more kindness in this world. And, while you need to be a honey badger when there's a gross, negligence or misconduct and there's false accusations, you have to protect yourself. You want to protect your company, you want to protect yourself, you want to protect your family, you also want to protect the country. But guys, we need more kindness, and we need more kindness and stop this polarization, pushing back and forth. We need more kindness in the agencies to say, hey, let's step back here. The ramifications of what we're doing are really potentially harming people. Let's make sure we know what we're doing and know that we're within our lanes, that we're following the law, we're doing what's right, pass the right test, and be kind. And so, that would be my message, as well as to support industry, or oil and gas associations like TIPRO. And I tell you, Alan, you were a fantastic chair of TIPRO. You led us through some tough times, and I appreciate all that you've done for our industry. And creating drillinginfo.com was just a godsend for the industry, helping with data, and so the industry could progress and be more data driven.
Well, I followed you and some other really great chairs at TIPRO, and I just, it was, you're always standing on the shoulders of those that came before you, and it's got a great history, and I was honored to have been there and to follow folks like you and J.R. Hurd and Scott Anderson and what have you.
No, it's a great group.
Well, I'm surprised the kindness thing, that was surprising to me. I wrote down here, all these companies cost you, I'm sure, more dollars than you want to count. And you still gave them plenty of compliments, and which made sense.
I want to help them because they're needed. The TCEQ is needed, the EPA is needed, but they need our help. Their missions are good, but they need to go about their missions in the right way.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Tad, and really appreciate it. This is going to be a great one.
Yeah, it's really nice to meet you, Tad. And I think, this is eye-opening for me and a privilege to get to spend time with you and hear what you've done for the industry. And I know I took a lot from it. I'm sure everybody else that listens will as well.
Well, Cody, Alan, it's been my pleasure, and I hope there's some great takeaways here. And we all need to work toward, improving life. And I think that's what we're in the business to do. And as individuals, we need to be as helpful to others as we can.
A great thought. Blended on that. Thank you, Tad.
Thank y'all.
Thanks for listening to this episode with Tad Mayfield. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone in the industry who needs to hear it. See you next time on Crude Awakenings. Produced by Rivery Marketing Group, a subsidiary of Rivery Capital.